Dr. Power. You guys have arrived.
Thank you, Chelsea. Hi, folks. Come on in. Jeff, V, seat over here. Andrew, Sue, Ward, if you come next to me, us old curmudgeons have to stick together. Angie, Dave, welcome. Glad you're all here. The seats for all today. Well, we're in week 4. The end of this week, we're halfway through the march, and I certainly hope you're enjoying it. I am. Strategy, as you know, at least in my mind, and I think you'll probably agree, is, if not the most, one of the very most important areas that you're getting paid for in your business. And so it's important. I wish we had more time together. It's going so quickly, and we almost need another class. Your EL2, I designed that course, and did some good strategy in there. But I'd like to see you take more strategy courses. That's just an old fart's opinion. November 11th coming up. I'd like to remember those that gave the service. We have a number of folks in our class, certainly your parents and people like that. Take a moment and pause. It's more than just a holiday, that we spend a few minutes reflecting upon folks who went away from home for 3, 4, 5 years, and the families moved on. And so we owe them a debt of thanks. And so I certainly contend that. And my own personal irritant is that we seem to start Christmas before the vets get their day on November the 11th. And so for me, the holidays can start and the advertisements can start on the 12th of November rather than the 11th. But anyway, what else have I got on my list other than that thing? Last week, last couple of weeks, we've been looking at a strategist perspective. We looked at some tools. We went into the basics of strategy. We're starting in that area. We talked about the 3 C's, the idea of populating that little area with some modeling and getting some data and information to dump on the table. Made sort of sense. And we also thought in terms that this week we want to push on into continuing with strategy, but now we're going to do the Porter's basic 5 strategies. It comes down to 3 actually: low cost, differentiated, and somewhere in the center they call the best cost. And then we subdivide these 2 on the flanks by focused and narrow, depending on the product lines and the type of customers you have. But basically the 2, and one type, of course, is the low cost. That's the Costco's at concrete floors. We don't spend a lot of money on trappings, but we give you the absolute best possible low cost, and that's a good marketing strategy. The other one is more subtle. It's in fact, I think I do a clip in here on the Emperor's New Clothes, a story of a little boy that points out the Emperor doesn't have any clothes on, but a couple of marketeers do such a perfect job of planting in the mind of the consumer, in this case the Emperor, that he just has to have these clothes to be intelligent and be well thought of among his peers. And the better that those marketeers do their job, the better you'll do your job if you're a differentiated strategy, the higher the value price can be in the mind of the consumer. And at the bottom you have the actual price, your fixed costs, where you can keep on producing at this price indefinitely, but you're not making any money. And somewhere in between become your selling price, your price point that you're going to sell this for. And the better the job you do at the value pricing in the mind of the consumer as marketeers, the higher you can raise that selling price. I was played neatly. I got one of the first IBM butterflies in Canada. I paid over $11,000 for it. A small little, I still have it today, it still works. $11,000 for a IBM butterfly laptop. But I thought it was pretty special as a consultant to have this, and I had a little laser, and I could take it to my clients. It weighed a ton, small little box, and put it on the client's thing, but it sure gave me that sizzle. I just had to have it. So they did a great job of me. Within 5 or 6 months after that, it cascaded from $11,000 down to about $4,000. And so that first mover thing, you have to be careful of that. And so that little story out of the way, in fact, on strategy, we do strategy every day. Coming here today, I crossed the road. And crossing the road, I did all those functions that we're talking about now doing as a strategist. I did an external and internal check. I came to the intersection. I decided the strategy, the position I wanted to occupy on the other side of the road, said that's where I want to be. I then did an external analysis, looking left and right, what's coming, making some analysis how fast those cars were coming. I did an internal analysis, what I got to work with. As an old fart at my age, I need the light with me. I need time to saunter across and get there. You're different. You can run in sneakers, you can jaywalk, you can take a different approach to get to that position you want to occupy. But we do that every day. If the ground, rain, the environment, the rain's coming, the ground is slippery, we do all those checks. We do all these things you're supposed to do in strategy, internal, externally, and make a strategy for getting across the road to that position we want to occupy. Well, the same thing is true here. We just take a little more time to explain it as we go through it. So we talked in terms of Porter's 5 generic strategies. And then the next step on that, after we've done that in this session, we're going to talk a bit about, that's the cake. How can we add the frosting to the cake? And we're going to give 7 new things that you can do to make one of those basic strategies even better. And included in that, one that is used a lot these days, particularly when in the mature stage and the competition is fierce based on your Porter's 5 forces model, is mergers and acquisitions. And so we have a context case this week. Sleeman's Brewery, just a short little case I put together, but an interesting story. John Sleeman in the 80s had a corner brewery, but not a lot of money in his jeans. But he came from the family of Sleemans that once upon a time in Canada had a great brand name, and they were right up there like Molson's, Labatt's, and Sleeman's. But during the Prohibition period, when the Kennedys were running rum back and forth, and the rye going out of Quebec with the Siemens group going back down there, they got caught. And they had the franchise, the license for clear beer bottles, the only ones in Canada that can have a clear beer bottle. The grandmother walked into John and said, "John, I want you to get the family name out of disrepute. Let's rebuild the package." Gave him the recipe for beer. And John looked at that, didn't have a lot of money, but through mergers and acquisitions, he was able to build the 3rd largest brewery in Canada in the span of a few decades. And he did it with a neat strategy of mergers and acquisitions, but also in stealth mode. He allowed all the small little breweries he was acquiring and doing mergers and acquisitions with across Canada to retain the facade of being who they were, small little microbreweries, local, and as a result, in the mind of the consumer, that's who I want to deal with, until he built it up to rival the top 2. But the top 2 had about 90% market share of the beer sales in Canada, and there's not much more they could do to punch any hole and to be fighting hard and spending a lot of effort to get that 1 point, 2 point, 3 point growth in the market share. And so at that point, he recognized the situation, and so he stepped back and he sold it to Shapiro, a large Japanese brewery with deep pockets, the ability to bring in automation and all the skills needed to go up against the other 2 breweries, the major breweries in Canada. But for that, he got $4 billion. Not a bad thing over a couple of decades to build it from there to there, and the strategy was using other people's money and mergers and acquisitions. So this week, we're going to look at that context case and just see how you can enhance your basic strategies by applying some of these 7 other tools that we're going to talk about today on moving it forward. In support of that, you'll find one of your MBA alumni went through here. She was the vice president of Sleeman's at the time, Frances Hartman, a wonderful woman. And Frances was kind enough, having guided the company through this mergers and acquisitions, to prepare for us from the HR department the checklist and things she did to make this thing go successfully. And in the past, I've just made it available and then sent out the electronic copies, but there's such a response for it, I've actually had a copy made and put it up in the bonus section for you. So if you have time and if you have the interest from an HR perspective, by all means, download a copy and take it with you. It's a nice piece of paper to hang on to. I've also done mergers and acquisitions. I work with another wonderful woman, Shelley McDade, and Shelley at that time was a vice president of a large credit union up island on the Vancouver Island, and to her credit, she engaged. I was a consultant working with her, and she on her board, and she championed, took through 4 mergers and acquisitions for that company. Every one of them was successful, and that's quite a feat because, as you'll read, 75% of them fail, and she was able to take them through and succeed. And now she's the CEO of a series of credit unions on the mainland, as well as the CEO of the Tier 2 credit unions for the province of BC. So if you're interested in credit unions, again, mergers and acquisitions, and some of the real challenges she faced on taking her company through this minefield, there's a video in the bonus section that's worth looking at too. So you've got both those documents to play with that will help you as you go through it. Just want to thank Sandy very much. Sandy has taken a lot of time, worked hard to get through all these assignments and get your grades and things back to you. And I understand that if they're not already back, they're about to be back through the weekend, very, very closely. Anyway, to have them, she had them in time for the next time. I have gone through in the process this week of going through, looking at all your, just out of curiosity, out of your presentations. I'm very interested in the PowerPoints and some of the things you discovered. So it's for my own education more than any grading. Sandy's taking care of that. But I just wanted to have a look at the wonderful things you found, just out of curiosity, because of my interest. Well, that's a bit of the background stuff that's happening. Let's go look at the paper today if we can. First front page, Globe talks in terms of, and keep in mind this is a week ahead of the when you actually get around to using it next Monday. China's military scientists target Canadian universities. It appears they're throwing money at 9 Canadian universities to get involved in sending over their academics to work shoulder to shoulder and do some research, and through the research glean information about Canada on a number of things ranging from drones to communications to satellite imaging. And that's all the stuff, because Canada's got one of the leading positions in artificial intelligence. We're good at what we do in that area, that little niche area, and we're being recognized for that increasingly around the world, that the Americans and the Chinese are coming to Canada to work alongside of us. But the question becomes national security, and are we, for money, are we giving away the family secrets for short-term gain, for long-term pain? That the Chinese have a long-term plan here, and getting access to some very good data, and so worth a talk. Again, it's all part of that thing we talked to last week about Porter's why nations are competitive and factor endowments, and this is advanced factor endowments to be competitive. In Canada, in the area of artificial intelligence, has got that slight edge, slight lead, pole position on these fields, and it's being recognized by China sending folks over here to train alongside and to learn what they can learn, and then are we training our competitors? Merkel stepping down across the way. I guess the main reason that we all recognize, I think is well recognized, documented, it was her globalist view of open borders and immigrants coming into the European Union that it's met with some pushback from the electorate folks over there. And so she's heading out after, I think, just about 16 years. But I took the time to do, I studied as part of my undergraduate work Bismarck and the consolidation and unification of Germany back in the 1870s in that zone. And Bismarck brought it back. But he was the longest, I think, one of the longest chancellors, and Helmut Kohl was the next longest, both around 16, 17 years as chancellor. And Merkel has got just about 16 years, so she's going to stay on as chancellor for another year and a half, which will put her right at the very top end of, if not the longest, the second longest chancellor in Germany. And then I studied to find out who the shortest time for chancellor was. Any thoughts? Goebbels. Goebbels. He was 1 day. He was chancellor for Germany. But we had a look at that. Researchers call for activity as human activity is pushing the caribou towards extinction. This clash of civilizations in the north is as more activity is starting to take place up there, and the global ice melts. The caribou numbers have dropped from over 1 million to 250,000, and they're saying it's a threat that they may go extinct in about 15 years if we don't do something about it. So it's a sign that we should be looking a little bit more at the environmental side of that. In fact, I suppose if for environmentalists you want to do anything more, just look up over your head 100 miles up. Google for me this week the word space junk, and you'll see what I mean, the wonderful business opportunities that are floating around as a stormtrooper overhead as we speak today. Ottawa is introducing new pay equity legislation for women and gender equality. Trudeau, to his credit, I think 50% of his cabinet are female, which is a good thing. He's got gender balance brought into play at this place. They've also set up a new department specifically for this women and gender equality. We want to consider that as a discussion this week. And around that whole topic, how does Canada compare on glass ceilings and glass cliffs? And how does it compare with our major trading partners of Japan and China and Germany and America? Worth looking at. The murder in Turkey is back in the news here, that his fiancée is now criticizing Trump for not being strident enough in his dealings with Saudi. And I'm reminded, it triggered my thought to Willie, my little dog. In fact, it's my daughter's dog. It's Wilhelmina is her name. When I take her out, I can't walk around with a Wilhelmina, so I call her Duke. In any event, I take Duke for this walk, and I can't do much these days. I'm waiting for an operation, but when I could, I'd take her around the track for a mile or so, 4 loops. And as you walk around the track on the back side here, there are houses and fence lines and tree lines, and a couple of large mastiffs in there. And Duke is only about 14-pound little barking thing. And we'd take our walk around, and she'd scamper ahead to the fence line. She'd bark, yap, 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 yap. The big mastiffs would come out and frothing at the mouth and barking, trying to get at her through the fence, couldn't. And she just had great pride in snapping until finally the owner would come out and call these two big dogs back and give them a talking to, and she'd waddle off with a big smile on her face. We'd do it. We did it 4 times, probably a bad thing. But each time she'd go around and stir up the Germans. Trump's got the Willie strategy going down cold here. It occurred to me the other morning, I smiled to myself, he gets up every morning at 4 o'clock. He sends out 6 tweets. And just after the Democrats settle down for the night on a particular topic, out comes the tweets in the morning. He stirs them all up, and for the whole day, their hair's on fire, as they say, speaking about the tweets and the silly things he's done, etc., etc. I'm sure, like Willie, he smiles to himself and wanders off, and he's taken carriage of these last 6 days going into the election. He sets where the top is going to be each day with these tweets he shoots off at 4 in the morning, and they haven't caught on to the joke yet. Anyway, I'm going to call it the Willie strategy. Ottawa's sticking with its F-35 aircraft program. There's a consortium. I think we spent almost $500 million so far just for the right to stay in this consortium since it started. But it gives us right membership in this thing, and some of the data, the information, and technology has taken place. And so we've paid for that. But at a certain point, Trudeau came in and said, we're not going to buy the F-35s. We're a long way down the road towards that process, so there's some costs involved in this idea. But is it a good idea? I mean, we need to spend, we've agreed to spend unofficially 2% of our GMP, and we're not spending that, on defense. And the military is our insurance policy until November the 11th, and Canada's underinsured. For businesses are underinsured because all the other countries around the globe, you name one, I'll tell you that they're building up their militaries as we speak. China and Russia and America. It's the NATO countries are all starting to ramp up. And so we're looking at this plane here. But I can't see how it's much good to us in our sovereignty. I'm thinking more about our 3 superhighways around us. Canada's North, single engine, can't stop, screaming up to Mach over the container ships and things. It's of very little use to us. No great airstrips up there to land. I'm not sure it's the right thing, but in any event, the F-35 is back on target. It's a major expense, $26 billion, I think is what they're talking about. And could we do better? And we got a lot of military folks in the class, and I'd be curious to get some insight from them as to whether they think it's a good expenditure or not. Calgary's considering walking away from the 2026 Olympic bid for the obvious reasons. Even though the feds pay half the cost, the other half, Calgary doesn't think it's got the wherewithal to make it all happen. They're estimating $3 billion. Officially in BC, we talked in terms of $4 billion, and that was almost a decade ago. And so $3 billion seems on the light side, but they normally do that, and then there's overruns. And we've had a bit of a talk about Olympics being necessary, and as business people in Calgary, you're going to pay for this. And what do you think? Should it be going ahead or not? Vancouver, vacancy tax skepticism. Story here is the new mayor is an NDP, Plato, right? NDP, former MP who's taken over as mayor. But he wants to raise the vacant home tax from 1% to 3%. You're lucky if you can get a home in Vancouver for $1 million these days. They run more than that. But just for rough numbers, say $1 million, 3%, that's $30,000 tax each and every year, in addition to your property tax, for the privilege of having a home in Vancouver. And the danger for us is that will spread to Victoria and other places. And is it a good thing? I mean, how would we feel if the snowbirds from Vancouver and go in great numbers down to Florida and have small places and timeshares and things down that if there's a 3% tax because you weren't a resident and the property was vacant? And so we have to think carefully what we're doing here. But it's an indication that we're short money. Well, it's a good lesson in this. This was the Greyhound withdrew from the running their line for profitability from Medicine Hat in Alberta over to Virden in Manitoba, and went through Moose Jaw, Maple Creek, and places like that. It was a small little, not well used little strip. They went out, but they gave it up. And Island Transportation, Wilson buses have stepped in and are now taking over the bus line. And I saw the same thing happen with WestJet and Air Canada on the initial days starting up. And here we have this small startup bus line taking over Greyhound's line. And my question for Greyhound is, do they understand that they may be building up a competitor and giving away, whenever you do a Boston portfolio analysis and you declare these are the dogs, I got to get rid of these, think carefully with those dogs. They still may be dogs to you, but are they the missing piece of the puzzle for a company like Wilson that is a cheap budget price way to get into the game? And so be careful what you discard. And I think Greyhound here may have not thought through that Boston Matrix analysis carefully on what's a dog and getting rid of it. Often you see shopping centers will get rid of a piece of land, lease on their food store, but the deal is that food store can never be put again to another food store. So Sobeys is not selling out to Save On Foods to put a rival in place with the same facilities. And so, anyways, going to watch that with interest to see if they've started up a competitor. Mexico. Well, Mexico, prof down there at the University of Monterrey came out and said 500,000 Central Americans cross Mexico each year, heading for Mexico and for the States. Not good words to say about Trump. He says instead of Trump offering compassion and turning the caravan in, he's turned into a midterm election issue, and he calls it an invasion of our country, and the military is waiting for you. And that's offensive to our professor colleague in Monterrey. He says Mexico should act with sovereignty and dignity and establish its own priorities and not be a wall for the United States. What he's saying basically is it should be an open border situation and come straight across. And we have different views in this class, and I appreciate and respect the different views, but this is just another illustration of open borders. And the concern I would have for Canada is that the more they come in south and the more there's challenges to become legalized in the States, the greater number are going to walk across the 49th parallel into Canada. And that's your school system, your medical system, your social service safety nets. And certainly we can take some more people into the boat, but there comes a point that the lifeboat just won't sustain more than a certain number. And right now we take about 225,000 immigrants a year, and that hasn't been disrupting our culture, and we've been able to accommodate, and they add value, and in fact it's competitive to attract and retrain good immigrants to be that fit for the missing piece that we have. But we just open the doors. It's a concern. The flu debate goes on about best shot, and says the messaging is muddled by the folks to be. And so once again, 9.9 million Canadians get the flu shot every year, and should we or should we not be getting it? Virtual reality, we talked a bit about this, but great big full-page story in here about children. A little 5-year-old girl is not doing well, but congenital heart defect. But they took the virtual reality and set up for the little muffin, and gave her trick-or-treating sort of experience. So through VR to see it. So as we've talked in this class, virtual reality has its place, and certainly for people who are spend a lot of time in bed without a lot of things to challenge them, virtual reality can be a good tool, as it can be for business, for real estate and other things. Corporate social responsibilities, got a big article in the paper here about a power for good, and they go on and say consumers expect quality products from a competitive price, but they're asking for relevant questions about ethics and corporate social responsibility and brand values, etc. And it goes on. In fact, there's an organization I want to bring to your attention, Canadian Business for Social Responsibility, Canadian Business for Social Responsibility, a national professional association. They have published 19 attributes that help a company transform into one of these sustainable companies. I'll try to dig it out and put it up on the site so you can have a look at it. And then they go on and talk about people are willing to pay more for their products. And I raise the question, are we? Are you prepared to pay more for your products, your T-shirts you're wearing? In fact, if I give you this challenge tonight, when you're sitting around the dining room table, just to ask everybody, look at the back of the shirt they're currently wearing, whether it's a shirt like I'm wearing, or it's a sweatshirt, or a T-shirt. Look at the back of it and tell me where it's made. Was it made by a Montreal textile worker? I suspect not. That's why Walmart's doing what Walmart does, is because people will say one thing about the environment and all the stuff, but when push comes to shove, I'd rather get 5 T-shirts from Walmart than 1 shirt from the Montreal textile workers. And we vote with our money. But just try that little experiment at home tonight and see what we're doing. In fact, again, bias right-wing Attila the Hun, and so I believe in environmental things, I believe in sustainability, but for me it's a business case. If you want to come into my office and say I want to save the whales and save the trees, Make a business case. If you can convince me that my organization will be healthier because of it, that it will maximize shareholders' values, then I'm all on board. But if you can't make that case that it just costs me money and there's no financial benefit to me or no something's going to contribute to my sustainability in the long run that will turn into money, I'm a hard person to move. And the argument for that could be as simple as those widows and orphans that come in, that widow has so much money and gives me the money in trust as a board of director member. It's not my money. She's given me the money in trust, and I've given her an IOU, a treasury bill, or a share, or something from the organization. But she expects from this organization a dividend check that she pays her mortgage and puts food on the table for her child. And what right do I have then, as the board of directors, on a whim to say, I think I'll go save the whales and trees and give a donation over here? It's the shareholders' money. And so it's maybe as simple as that. And maybe I'm oversimplifying, but for me it's a business case, but it's worth a discussion, and I may be poking the bear and going too far. The environmentalists will say, no, it's just the right thing to do. But remember, again, we're in a global economy. And if I do this, if I do these like carbon tax credits, and my competitor in China doesn't, and it's tweedly-dum between the products, do you really think that you, the competitor, the consumer, will still do the right thing and buy the one at the higher price because it's the right thing to do, like fair coffee that we do? I think most of us, I won't say most of us, certainly I do, I walk by the fair coffee, probably because that's the type of person I am, I suppose. But I'm looking for the bargain in the coffee. I like good coffee, but I like if it was on sale, I'll buy that coffee. Anyway, there's a good stimulating thing for conversations. Anyway, that's that paper. Let's see what else I got here for to stir it up today. Midterm elections coming up. We're going to have that conversation on November the 6th. My sense is in the class, and I asked Ward to sit over here close to me because we're clearly two opposing views on Trump, and there's nothing wrong with that. That's what this class is about, is to test and challenge each other's hypotheses, and Ward's made some wonderful posts on the site. So on November the 6th, I think it's 50-50 in our classes on which side of the line you fall on, Plato or Aristotle, nationalism, social, globalism. I think the same thing is going to be in the States. It's going to be extremely tight down there on Democrats versus Republicans. And it makes a big difference to us. And it makes a big difference, I think, to the world. If Trump gets thumped on this thing and they go into this lame duck situation for the next 2 years that nothing get passed in the States, the market will come down. The 401s in the States will come down. And if the market comes down there, the market will come down here. It's a concern. But we'll see. But it'll be fun on November the 6th to sit and watch all that. But I think this class is equally divided for and against what's happening down south of the border. Calgary looks to raise commercial property taxes to offset weak downtown market. This drove me crazy a little bit. I mean, Calgary, you recall, was just talking about the Olympic bid. But now Calgary's gone through some tough times there. They're coming back up a little bit, but there's certainly the strip malls and their shopping centers, etc., have large vacancies. And that makes it hard for your pension plan and my pension, because we own those malls probably in our Canada pension plan. We put some of the mortgages together with it. But right now when they're hurting, it's hard to find tenants. Calgary is hurting, needs money, and so they're taxing these commercial properties to offset the weak downtown market. And I don't think that's the way to go, but we'll see what happens. China is, Shanghai Energy is suing some former executives for fraud. And we should just understand a little bit the Chinese, which is interesting. And in Canada, in the States, the contract's the contract, and it's in there, it's signed, it's enforceable, etc. And the Chinese will sign the same sort of contracts, but a slightly different view of the hand on how they view this thing. The contract is made with today's circumstances, ecosystem, and if the situation changes dramatically, they're of the mindset, the mental model, that we can adjust the contracts now because the situation has changed. And that flies in the face of our view of a contract as a contract. And they also say if push comes to shove, even though we have a contract, I will take care of my family first, my country second, and then I'll talk to you as a third party, notwithstanding what a contract has to say. And so it's interesting here with these executives and for fraud that understand, again, they're just slightly different how we view things. SNC-Lavalin is still pushing on with the hearings for frauds, briberies, and allegations, and may have to do some restructuring because of what we talked about last week. And I commend to you the Bentley ethical test that we'll cover later on in one of the sessions. But a good thing for you to know and think about as we do it. Notley is coming forward. Remember last week she talked in terms of help with respect to more vehicles to move the grain and move the oil. And there's always this competition between grain or oil by the major rail lines. And she's asking now for a tax holiday from the federal government to make this go round. And so it's obviously a hard point going on right now. But for us, it's the supply chain management that it's important today that we give some consideration to supply chain management. It's that Porter's determinants again of the advanced factor endowments, once again showing its face that we have to make sure that we have them in place or else we cannot be competitive. In Canada, no big surprise, an adjunct research professor at the Institute of Political Economy at Carleton University, but he's also a senior advisor to the Broadband Institute. Well, we always look for the biases. Broadband Institute, as you know, would be an NDP, which would be Plato, which would be left view. So here he's saying tax cuts for corporations are not the solution. Don't give corporations tax cuts. He makes a persuasive argument why we shouldn't give them those sort of write-offs. But what we've done with Americans, you recall, Trump has dropped the tax level for corporate taxes in the States. They're now equivalent to ours, where before we had a marginal advantage on tax cuts. But also they've adjusted their tax code that the Americans can write off their goods almost in 1 year if they buy a car, buy machinery, etc. They've got an advantage there. So of the two proposals, if my company was international, I prefer to be in the States right now for the tax considerations. And so what's being proposed here, and Trudeau is coming out with some sort of statement on this here in the fall at the economic statement, that he may well adjust our taxes down for corporations once again to get the edge on the American tax system, or at least counterfoil this how their income tax structured to get some advantage on how fast you can deduct capital items. And so it's coming to a head a little bit. But then you get this race to the bottom that if we do that, then Trump will do another tax. He's talking about another round of tax cuts, not for corporations, but for middle class if elected. His people get in. And so there's this race to the bottom taking place. And there's a danger in that too. So let's talk a little bit about the taxes in Canada, and are they the appropriate level? Can small business, because small business are the engine. That's what makes the wheels go round. In fact, it's small businesses are like turtles. And it seems to me that every year we need this new crop of turtles. And if you can imagine turtles on a beach, shells, eggs just coming up to the sand and rushing madly to the shoreline, those are your small businesses. And as they run down there, they get eaten by gulls and everybody else does whatever with them. And so some hit the water and some get out to sea, some thrive, and a couple of years later they come back onto land. And so those ones become good-sized organizations. But the attrition rate for all the rest, it's a disaster for turtles. And the same thing for small business. Lots of failures, and failures they learn how to do it even better next time. But if you didn't have these small businesses buying new office furniture and office equipment and new restaurants setting up and buying restaurant equipment and new bank loans, etc. If you didn't have this feeding the engine of the large businesses, the economic situation will collapse. So we need to encourage and foster and feed and make the ground fertile for small businesses in Canada. And so have we done that with our taxes, particularly where the states are coming down? I can run my business here. 25 miles from here, I can see the mountains in Olympia over here. I can sit in the States and have a low tax rate and run the course online from there just as easily, and my taxes would come down dramatically. And so if that's the feeling across Canada by small businesses, there'll be a sucking sound as people flush down there if you do, as suggested here, increase the taxes and make it more difficult. Let's see what else is in here. I guess that's the end of that. There's one more little piece here I want to talk about for a second. And that was on the topic of IBM. That was a good business case there, something to watch. If you get a minute, have a look at IBM's $34 billion purchase of Red Hat, which was interesting. And IBM, the lesson in here is the need with this Internet of Everything to reposition your organization quickly to that place across the street that you want to go to. It may not be that corner, maybe over here you want to go. So identify the position that you want to occupy as your first step as you do this. And so they've identified that IBM are getting out of traditional Big Blue and things we thought about, and now they're into cloud, and Red Hat was a good fit for them to boost the ability to exploit the opportunities that the cloud presented, where software and programs are off outside and external servers bring it back to the individual. And it's a good business model to make it. But $34 billion, and this was a Canadian man who went down and set this thing up, and over 20 years has done it, and he's brought himself into a $34 billion with a partner business from monetizing an idea. Didn't need those things that Marx talks about, the idea of yeah, it was Marx. Marx talks about of capital and labor and land. They have to have those to make the wheels go round. Today it's just an idea and how to monetize it and get the positioning right. And he's done that and done it well, so it's a good model to look at. I guess the final thing I'll talk about a little bit is fracking and earthquakes, and there's lots of evidence starting to appear that in BC and up around Fox Creek, etc., and Alberta's got the same problem there too with the fracking taking place, that it is weakening and causing some earthquakes taking place. And so are you for fracking? Are we doing enough? Is it a concern? Does it damage the water tables? I was watching with interest another business model in New England. They've all that nuclear waste from the nuclear plants and things there, and what they do is they take it and they put it into the hole that the fracking makes and put it down underneath the ground. Well, that leaches in one thing or another, and in danger of going out in these earthquakes that take place. Are you contaminating the land? So I'd like to talk a bit about fracking and the idea of the dangers to Alberta and BC that may cause. Well, I think that's everything enough for today to get focused on, guys. Go and enjoy, and remember November 11th. Take care now. Bye-bye.